Well, first let me say that I'll take it chronologically. Before the case was argued,
Right.
both Bill and I had discussed the case at some length, and I do remember it, with Justice Jackson. And I don't think he was just playing the devil's advocate. I really think he was saying what was on his mind, that he had pretty grave misgivings about reversing Plessy against Ferguson. You'll remember Plessy against Ferguson was the precedent that held that separate but equal education was lawful.
Transportation, not education. It's a railroad case.
All right, right. You're right. I stand corrected. We actually wrote a couple of memoranda on those points. When the case was argued, I was there in court, and I did hear him ask Thurgood Marshall a very embarrassing question, because Marshall would take the position that the 14th Amendment prohibits special legislation based on the color of the person legislated against. Mm-hmm. And then Jackson said, how do you explain all of the special legislation about Indians? And Marshall never was able to answer that question. He mumbled something about the fact that perhaps the Indians didn't have the proper organization to come and dispute it. Mm-hmm. But the day when the cases were to be argued in conference, discussed in conference, there was that night a party of the law clerks and their wives. So I, on my own initiative, went into his office and told him that we were going to have a party of the law clerks, and I think it would be pretty wise not to talk to any of the law clerks about what went on in the conference. And at least in our case, that's what happened. And once the conference was over, we never heard a word about that case until the final day of the term, when it came down that the case had been put over for re-argument. Now, a few years ago, I saw on the French television a film which has obviously been made in English but dubbed into French about the Brown case. And told pretty much from the point of view of the Thurgood Marshall, the plaintiff's lawyers, but it went through what purported to be the whole story. And according to that film, one of the reasons that the case was put over for argument was because Jackson had said that if you're going to come down to reverse Plessy, I will dissent. And rather than risk that, they decided to put it over. Everything from and after the date when I heard the argument is all hearsay. I just from entirely different sources. I think it's entirely consistent with what Jackson had said prior to the argument. Prior to the argument, I remember there were two main points, and they were 2 points which were written by us in two particular memoranda. One was the inherent problem of reversing a decision on which very important institutions had grown up over the years. And in that respect, I do distinctly remember Jackson having told us beforehand that Justice Black had told him that if the Supreme Court declared segregation in school to be illegal, the South would fight. The second point, the second memorandum, was more on the pointing out that you can't say anything that was terribly wrong about the decision of Plessy against Ferguson. There was a great deal of sense to it. It is interesting that at that stage, Black was one of his closest friends. They were constantly in and out of each other's offices.
Were you asked at some point prior to the December 52 hearing to put into writing at some point a memorandum of thoughts concerning the property?
I think that the memorandum memorandum that I write and the memorandum that Bill wrote were both in response to requests from him.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been so long I can't swear to it. But I think that's right. Now, I am sure of this much, that in the time of at the time of the confirmation of Justice Rehnquist, there he said that memorandum was done at the specific request of Justice Jackson. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably right. And I certainly have nothing in my recollection to contradict that. It's just that I don't have any affirmative recollection that was so. But I think it's probable.
Were you asked to sort of put down your thoughts on it, or did he give you a sense that?
No, I think that these were. This was along the line that he had started. Because this, by the way, is also something which you will find in other Jackson works: the reluctance to reverse prior Supreme Court decisions where a way of life has grown up around it. This was not the first time that a thought of this sort had occurred to it.
But as you put your memos together for him, did he tell you how to?
I will remember one thing that I did in that memo, which I was kind of proud of, because this was not from him, this was from me. But to support his position, I found a decision of the highest court of South Africa, where they had found that decisions that had taken away the rights of the Cape Coloreds to vote were unconstitutional.
Right.
But since they had been relied upon and had been going on as a basis for conducting elections for so many years, it was not incumbent upon them to do something about it. They merely remarked that it was unconstitutional and hoped that the Parliament would do something about correcting it. That I remember, I put that in the memo. You perhaps remember having seen that. Indeed, that was one of the reasons when there was such a fuss about it. I was a little afraid to come up and produce my copy of that memo because I was afraid that some reporter would get a hold of it and say that Rehnquist really was in favor of apartheid.
When those memos, isn't in a normal course, like Brown, you gave those memos to Jackson. Would he critique them? I mean,
I guess so.
But to you and
not to me. No, I don't. As far as I know.
on the Rehnquist, the confirmation you just talked about, was it uncomfortable for you to be brought in?
Sure.
Yeah.
I was enjoying. I was skiing in Stad, and I didn't particularly enjoy being called in. My memory then was a great deal better than it is now, but even at that time, it wasn't perfect. I wasn't as absolutely certain as I should have been.
Right.
But I did, and indeed, from the very beginning, there are certain details upon which Bill and I disagree, still. But on everything that's really important, we agreed.
Did you get, I know that one of the critical parts is the memo that you wrote, was that your memo or was it just your reflection of what you thought Jackson was thinking?
Look, it was a memo which Bill and I wrote and I signed, and it came as a result of I don't know if it was a specific direction from him to write it, or as an effort to further go along the lines of arguments that he had suggested.
Sure.
It was one or the other.
Right, right.
And likewise on the other argument that Bill signed, I had more to do with that than he will admit.
Right, right.
There are some of the phrases in there which I know were mine.
So even though the initials, yours is,
We, desks right next to one another, and we were looking over each other's shoulders, and there's a lot of stuff. And it also happened on occasion